The Committee on Homeland Security Subcommittee on Emergency Management and Technology of the United States House of Representatives will come to order. Without objection, the subcommittee may recess at any point. The purpose of this hearing is to examine the impact of the open border policies that they have on emergency management services and how the unprecedented flood of migrants has strained public services and resources in cities, states, and counties across this nation. Without objection, the gentleman from New York, Mr. Garbarino, Mr. Molinaro, Mr. Lawler, and Mr. Langworthy, and the gentleman from California, Mr. Correa, and the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Moskowitz, are permitted to sit on the dais and ask questions to the witnesses. So ordered, I recognize myself for an opening statement. I want to begin by thanking our witnesses for testifying before the Emergency Management and Technology Subcommittee today. Today's hearing will focus on how the border crisis has impacted our national preparedness and emergency management. I look forward to hearing from each of you, and thank you for your dedication to keeping your communities and this country safe. As members of this subcommittee, it is important that we shed light on what is happening to our nation's emergency services as a result of the unprecedented surge in illegal immigration. President Biden and Secretary Mayorkas' open border policy are having a direct impact on our first responders' ability to help their communities in their time of need and to prevent future emergencies. We have heard reports of how state, city, county, and other resources are being strained across this country. Basic services are being cut to offset the cost of housing illegal immigrants. In my home state of New York, even New York City Mayor Eric Adams has said that, quote, "This issue will destroy New York City." I am concerned that Americans' quality of life will never be able to recover from this crisis. I am concerned that law-abiding taxpayers will suffer and experience delayed services by first responders. And I am concerned that we will have gaps in our national preparedness and response should a significant event occur. As a former councilman in America's largest town, a retired NYPD detective, and former chief of the Island Park Fire Department, I know firsthand that emergency preparedness requires advanced investigation, training, and resources. And it is essential for protecting vulnerable communities from extreme weather events, man-made disasters, and acts of terrorism. However, emergency personnel such as police and fire departments are diverting much of their attention to managing the thousands of migrants who are arriving weekly in their communities. In 2023 white paper, the National Emergency Management Association stated that emergency management agencies and systems are being strained due to being asked to, quote, "provide support to a growing number of challenges not related to natural hazards such as cyber attacks, school safety, homelessness, the opioid crisis, and the humanitarian support for migrants." This committee has already investigated the humanitarian cost of the migrant crisis to cities across this great country. However, as the Subcommittee on Emergency Management and Technology, it is important that we specifically assess how the border crisis has hindered emergency preparedness and first responder services. Last week, I had the pleasure of traveling to Ranking Member Carter's district in New Orleans to conduct a hearing on the state of emergency preparedness in coastal communities, and had the opportunity to view completed and ongoing recovery projects following Hurricane Katrina. It was sobering to see the foundations of houses that were never rebuilt, and to think all those stranded during the immense flooding. Before Hurricane Katrina made landfall in 2005, the state of Louisiana evacuated an estimated 1.5 million people. Government officials were challenged to relocate and house people in every gymnasium and open space available. With this in mind, how is the unprecedented migrant crisis impacting our preparedness for future emergencies? Cities across this nation are already having difficulty managing the migrant population, leaving very little room and resources for disaster preparedness. In Chicago, migrants have been housed in police stations and school gymnasiums. In California, a state with the largest homeless population in the United States of America, the Department of Homeland Security has released thousands of migrants into cities like San Diego. With limited shelters and housing options available, officials have struggled to meet the demand for housing migrants, moving them to airports, public buildings, and any space available. Across the country, emergency managers in every community are burdened and unable to meet the increased demand for their services, all while some cities have made concerning budget cuts to their police departments to offset the cost of housing migrants. In a time when carjackings are skyrocketing and fentanyl deaths are overwhelming, cities should not be cutting police departments' budgets or citywide services such as fire service for tax-paying Americans. It is understandable that migrants would seek safety and opportunity in the greatest country in the land. So many of our families started out with a relative who sought the American dream. However, the influx of migrants that we are seeing today is having unprecedented consequences on public safety and our emergency management. People come to the United States of America because they want safety and opportunity. However, the Biden administration's inability to secure the southwest border and discourage illegal immigration has encouraged millions of migrants to take advantage of city resources, which is negatively impacting local communities. As a result, first responders and emergency managers are strained, making our own communities less safe. We should all be concerned about its impact on the future of this great country. I look forward to discussing these challenges and hearing more about what Congress can do to support our brave first responders from every corner of this great nation. I now recognize the ranking member of the subcommittee for his opening statement.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, and thank you. Let me start by saying that this subcommittee, under the leadership of Congressman D'Esposito, has been very productive and has a series of productive hearings. Just last week, we're in my congressional district in Louisiana, where we received testimony about emergency preparedness challenges in coastal communities like the ones Chairman and I represent. Unfortunately, I'm concerned that this hearing may be a departure from the way we have worked together in Congress. I hope that is not the case. Some Republicans like to grandstand about border security, but the reality is many of them have voted against border security funding and oppose federal funds to help communities like New York that is receiving migrants. Many Republicans would rather demonize asylum seekers and talk about impeaching Secretary Mayorkas than come up with productive solutions to border challenges. I sincerely hope that this practice will change and we will get back to doing the work of this committee for the American people in a true bipartisan way, one that demonstrates the ability and the willingness to find real solutions and not finger-pointing. It's hard to have a productive conversation with some on the other side focused on scoring political points. That's not what we're here for. I respect my colleagues on both sides of the aisle and hope that we will work in a vein to come up with solutions and not brinksmanship. Instead, we should be working together to respond to global migration phenomena, implement a more orderly and humane process at our border, and fix our broken immigration system. America has long been known as a land of opportunity, a place where diverse people from different cultures have come, one way or another, and made this country a better place. Surely that can't be lost on my colleagues and friends from New York who live and work in the shadow of Lady Liberty, of Ellis Island, and the city where millions have arrived from around the world fleeing poverty and persecution. Louisiana, and specifically my community of New Orleans and Baton Rouge, is also a testament of how diverse cultures merge and create a vibrant and unique community. The city's cultural amalgamation is shaped by French American, Spanish, Italian, Native Americans, and Creole influences, among others, creating a distinctive and diverse identity. The city's music, cuisine, language, and tradition reflects the contributions immigrants have made to our community. Jazz, a genre synonymous with New Orleans, is a perfect example of this rich cultural fusion. Immigrants also play a crucial role in Louisiana's labor force, making up 13% of residents employed in farming, fishing, and forestry occupations. Across the country, migrants fill crucial gaps in the labor market, providing a diverse and skilled workforce, particularly in industries such as technology and agriculture, where their expertise and hard work are essential to the nation's prosperity. Immigrants also play a pivotal role in driving economic growth. Many bring entrepreneur spirit and business acumen, establishing businesses that create jobs and stimulate local economies. That doesn't mean migration is without challenges. As we all know, there are, in fact, many challenges. There certainly are issues to address regarding people arriving at our border, and we are absolutely in need to provide resources to communities receiving migrants. If there are impacts to emergency services, we need to understand what they are and find ways to move forward. But migration always has been and will continue to be a benefit to our country. I hope we will not lose sight of the fact that during today's hearing, and I hope that the hearing will be productive rather than political. Going forward, I hope the subcommittee will focus its attention on important programs within its jurisdiction, such as emergency preparedness grants, which are critical to places like New York and New Orleans, and the Nonprofit Security Grant Program, which helps vulnerable nonprofit organizations strengthen their security. The subcommittee should also focus on countering weapons of mass destruction office, which has uncertain future because Republicans have failed to do the necessary work to ensure the office's existence. We have yet to hold a hearing on this important office, yet I'm hopeful we will soon. The subcommittee is also yet to hold a hearing on the Office of Health Security and Science and Technology Directorate, and they certainly need our oversight as well. Once again, I'm hopeful we will do that soon. I thank all the witnesses for being here today, and I look forward to your testimony and appreciate your time, your experience, your expertise, and your willingness to share with us today. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Well, thank you, Ranking Member Carter. Other members of the subcommittee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record. I'm very pleased and thankful to have such an important panel of witnesses spanning from many places before us today. I ask that the witnesses please rise and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you will give before the Committee on Homeland Security of the United States House of Representatives will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. Please be seated. Let the record reflect that the witnesses have answered in the affirmative. I would now like to formally introduce our witnesses, starting with Mr. Bruce Blakeman, who currently serves as the county executive for my home county, home of 1.4 million people in New York, where he has advocated for improved law enforcement to fight rising crime. Mr. Blakeman has served in a variety of local government capacities, such as a councilman in America's largest town and a former commissioner of the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey in the aftermath of September 11th, 2001. Mr. David Favreau has served as sheriff of Clinton County, New York since 2003 and has an extensive background in law enforcement spanning decades. The sheriff is a dedicated public servant and throughout his career has received numerous state and community acknowledgments, including Citizen of the Year. Mr. Andrew Ansbro is president of the Uniformed Firefighters Association of Greater New York. As president, he represents over 20,000 active duty and retired New York City firefighters. Prior to joining the FDNY in February of 2001, Mr. Ansbro served with the New York City Police Department. Mr. Ansbro is a September 11th survivor and assisted in recovery efforts at Ground Zero. Mr. Murad Awauda is the executive director of the New York Immigration Coalition. He has dedicated over 2 decades to advocating for low-income communities of color across the state of New York. Mr. Awauda was honored with a U.S. congressional recognition and public service awards from the New York State Senate and Assembly. I thank the witnesses for being here today, and again, thank you for your service to New York, to our country, and for being dedicated to keeping our communities safe. I now recognize Mr. Blakeman of Nassau County for 5 minutes to summarize his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Diaz-Canseco, Ranking Member Carter, and distinguished members of the Subcommittee on Emergency Management and Technology for holding this hearing and allowing me the opportunity to address you regarding preparedness and protecting our communities. I especially want to thank my Congressman, Chairman Diaz-Canseco, for all you do to keep our communities safe, our country safe, and the world a safer place for Americans. I want to thank my fellow witnesses for appearing with me today, and I'm honored to be in your presence. almost 1.5 million people. We are larger in population than 10 states. Our gross domestic product is larger than 144 nations in the United Nations. In Nassau County, we have every race, every religion, and every ethnic group. In many respects, we are a snapshot of America. In Nassau County, we have made a determination that we do not want to take part in the misguided migrant program. Nassau County is not a sanctuary county. This decision was not made lightly. The residents of Nassau County understand some of the humanitarian arguments made during this migrant crisis. The one thing that is clear for my constituents is that they want our borders secured. They want to know who is coming into America. They want anyone coming into America to be properly vetted. They only want immigrants who share American values. The current situation where virtually everybody is allowed to reside in America by merely claiming asylum status is an untenable situation for many reasons. First of all, there is such a large amount of migrants crossing the border that many migrants do not get fully vetted and may not receive an asylum hearing for more than 2 years. In essence, people are roaming around the United States for 2 years without any determination on whether or not they are truly entitled to asylum status. This is not a humanitarian program. This is a foreign invasion. Asylum status has always been a consideration for individuals from other countries whose life and freedom was in jeopardy based on either their political beliefs, religious beliefs, or their ethnicity. It is inconceivable that millions of migrants who have crossed our borders seeking asylum qualify as truly eligible for asylum status. As we have seen around America, municipalities have become burdened with the responsibility to clothe, feed, house, and educate migrants, as well as provide social services without any cogent federal program to regulate or pay for these individuals. In Nassau County, we have seen a surge in crime by migrants who have engaged in all types of criminal activity, from drug dealing, car theft, burglary, to more violent crimes. Recently, a gang from Chile was arrested by our outstanding Nassau County Police Department, only to be released without bail due to state laws that give more rights to criminals than they do to victims. These Chilean gang members who are part of this migrant program were freed by liberal bail laws. They disappeared, and they may still be in the United States committing more crimes against the public. That is outrageous, and it is dangerous. The federal government should mandate that any migrant in the U.S. who is arrested for a crime with probable cause be deported. Our police officers also arrested someone who was in our country illegally for transporting over 3 kilos of pure fentanyl that was smuggled across the border illegally from China to Nassau County. This amount of fentanyl was enough to kill almost 3 million people, virtually the whole population of Long Island, Nassau, and Suffolk County. If we are serious about ending the heroin and opioid epidemic that is killing our kids once and for all, the first step is securing our borders. In Nassau County, many leaders of school districts, especially in minority communities, have expressed their opposition to migrant and sanctuary programs as they cannot accommodate the large influx of new students that they have not budgeted for. Nassau County residents are not heartless. Most of our residents are immigrants or relatives of immigrants. We believe in an immigration program that makes sense
but not open borders. I would urge this committee and the other members of Congress to consider a common sense approach to immigration. Seal our borders. Nobody should be let into this country until they have had a hearing and found eligible for asylum status. There should be an organized guest worker program that allows for legal immigration for those who want to be gainfully employed. We have seen in many communities the current disaster created by the current migrant policy. This is fixable only if we revert to traditional American values, defend our borders, and apply a common sense approach to immigration. I want to thank the members of the committee for this opportunity. I'd like to thank you for your service, for your hard work in tackling this issue, and I want to wish you all a Merry Christmas, a Happy Hanukkah. May God bless you all, and God bless America. Thank you.
Thank you, County Executive Blakeman. I now recognize Sheriff Favreau for 5 minutes to summarize his opening statement.
Chairman D'Esposito, Ranking Member Carter, and esteemed members of the Subcommittee on Emergency Management and Technology. Thank you for convening this crucial hearing on protecting our preparedness. My name is David N. Favreau, and I proudly serve as the Sheriff of Clinton County, New York. Today, I stand before you to discuss the challenges facing our law enforcement and shed light on pressing difficulties faced by our community in light of the border crisis. It is crucial that Congress act now to secure the border and protect our communities. One policy that could easily be re-implemented is remain in Mexico, or simply deeming migrants ineligible for asylum if they have touched a safe third country prior to illegally crossing into the United States. The border crisis has placed a significant strain on our small rural community. The influx of transient populations funneled through our region has not only raised concerns, but has led to a surge in emergency response calls. Staffing shortages, which are exacerbated by nationwide challenges in hiring and retention, hinder our ability to address safety needs promptly. Recent high-speed vehicle pursuits involving migrants have led to bodily injury and property damage, highlighting the pressing need for comprehensive national strategy to protect our community and law enforcement resources. Nestled in the most northeastern point of New York, Clinton County boasts a unique landscape with a population of approximately 80,000 residents, nearly all of whom are native of the county. Our region spans over 1,000 square miles, sharing a northern border with Canada and an eastern boundary with Lake Champlain, also known as the Sixth Great Lake. With over 70 miles of lake shore and approximately 30 miles of international border, our county plays a crucial role in interstate traffic. Interstate 87 serves as a main thoroughfare from Canada directly to New York City. Key statistics paint a stark picture. Gotaways have surged 99%, reaching 995 in fiscal year 2024. Yet, despite handling 70% of all encounters with immigrants, the Swanton Border Patrol sector, who is responsible for 295 miles along the northern border, operates with only 15% of the staffing allocated to that entire region. The impact on our emergency management is evident. Our 911 call centers are experiencing increased calls for services with language barriers that are now complicating responses and rescues. Detention presents its own challenges. The Clinton County Jail being the sole facility accepting detainees from the Border Patrol. Financial cost of housing federal detainees has already exceeded over $2,000 just for that one facility. Health issues that have been created. When inmates were detained at Clinton County Jail, they were in and out in a matter of 24-hour process. We fought hard because they were not even able to be properly TB tested, which could be spreading significant disease to the rest of our communities, the rest of our country. While you may be familiar with southern border crossing challenges, the North provides similar physical challenges like weather-related issues, including harsh winters with temperatures exceeding minus 35 degrees. Extreme temperatures pose additional risk for both migrants and law enforcement who are in dense forest in the county throughout the night. One issue impacting our local residents that I'd also like to highlight is the housing shortage. We're all familiar with stories of migrant relocation to New York City's solution to migrant crisis, that have also been relocated, these migrants, and this time to Clinton County. This shuffle affects with human lives, not only strains our resources, but also impacts our local residents who house current housing shortage issues. In closing, the legal migration of Northern New York is not just a matter of law enforcement. It is a challenge that touches every aspect of our community. The strain on resources and the security threats posed by an open border demand urgent attention. The federal government must enact legislation to ensure the lasting security of our border. Reinstating the MPP Remain in Mexico policy is a crucial step towards regaining control and understanding who enters our country. A significant problem law enforcement faces to be able to investigate and track down crimes is having information, having DNA, having fingerprints, and most importantly, having an identity. We are allowing people by the millions to come into our country that we are not able to obtain any of this critical data. Therefore, our function becomes useless for an impact with people migrating in without recognition. Thank you for the opportunity to share my perspective. I'm committed to assisting this committee in addressing the critical issues that continue to impact our community.
Thank you, Sheriff, and thank you for your service. I now recognize Mr. Ansbro for 5 minutes to summarize his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Esposito. I'd like to thank the other members of the committee for having me down here today to discuss from the FDNY labor perspective the effects of the migrant crisis on our operations. My name is Andrew Ansbro. I'm the president of the Uniform Firefighter Association, Local 94. I represent approximately 8,500 active firefighters and 11,000 retired firefighters in the Fire Department of the City of New York. In relation to the recent $7 billion in budget cuts imposed by the City of New York due to the escalating migrant crisis, the FDNY budget has been reduced by $75 million. Due to this, the department has had to make some cuts that are, some of which are quite draconian. I'd like to bring to your attention the significant safety concerns from the perspectives of firefighting and how these budget cuts will affect the residents of New York City and also the firefighters. As we're all aware, firefighting is an inherently dangerous business and the risks continue to grow each year. We must do all that we can to ensure that the members of my department return safely every tour, but also to make sure that New York City residents are not compromised by these budget cuts. So we must prioritize safety above all else. A little history of the FDNY staffing issues. The FDNY is made up of 193 engine companies and 140 ladder companies. New York City has periodically reduced staffing during budget crises. In the 1960s, engine companies had 6 firefighters. In the 80s, it was dropped down to 5. They tried to drop it down to 4 at that time, and we fought back and forth probably for the last 20 years, 4 firefighters on an engine being the rock bottom New York City could operate with. As of recently, we had 5 firefighters on 20 engine companies in New York City, approximately 10% of the companies. These are the busiest companies in the city, regularly doing 5 to 6 or 7,000 runs a year. They cover the areas of the city with the most dense population and the highest fire load. They have been staffed with 5 firefighters for the past several years. The number was 60 at one point in time, but dropped by Mayor Bloomberg. Recently, due to the staffing reductions, the mayor has chosen to drop staffing on these engine companies. The last time he attempted to do this was when he first entered office in January 2022. 1 week after he removed the staffing, we had the famous Twin Parks fire in the Bronx, which 17 people were killed. Many of those companies would have been staffed with 5 firefighters, and we believe lives could have been saved. We explained to the mayor how the 5th firefighter's removal would have affected operations, and he agreed and brought back the 5th firefighter immediately. He felt the savings was not worth the additional risk. However, due to the budget cuts, it appears the FDNY has changed its position, and they have taken away the 5th firefighter in these companies. This is a serious public safety issue that affects these areas. The majority of the fires are in these areas where these fire companies reside. Numerous studies have highlighted the importance of having adequate staffing and firefighters on an engine company. Studies have been done that show having an additional firefighter in these companies will reduce the time it takes to get water on fire by 50%. In a profession where seconds matter, this adds minutes to a fire operation, will absolutely cost people their lives. Another issue is that it's a decrease in the manpower pool. From time to time, we have people leave during the middle of the tour due to injury. Those people are usually replaced by the 20 additional firefighters that are working on the engines. Having these people not available will cause other companies to go below staffing, which is below safe operating procedures. Truck companies will be forced to operate without an OV position, outside vent. This person's position is to go to the rear of a fire building, open the window, let the gases out, but also enter the back of the building searching for victims. These will be the positions that will be lost when firefighters get injured mid-tour or go sick mid-tour. Regularly, we lose 15 to 20 or 25 members per day. So basically, an eighth of the city would be out without their OV position for the remainder of the tour, which is a serious risk to the lives of civilians and also firefighters. Other issues that we have with the lack of the budgetary financing, we're currently in an ongoing negotiation with the City of New York regarding our counterterrorism operations. It would probably shock a lot of people to know that only 10% of the FDNY is properly trained in counterterrorism measures, where they are also outfitted with bullet-resistant gear to go into an active shooter zone. Right now, the level is set at 10%. We have been negotiating with the city to increase it so that every company in the city has proper vests and proper training. Right now, the City of New York is only offering 10% of the engine companies, 10% of the truck companies, and the training they want to implement is a 3-day training. They've actually dropped it down to 1-day training. These negotiations have been ongoing even before the budget crisis due to the migrants, and we are quite confident there will be no money to fully equip the FDNY for counterterrorism training to enter active shooter zones due to the migrant crisis. I know many of the other speakers here spoke directly about the issue of how the migrants directly affect them. I'm here I feel I've discussed a lot of the indirect issues on how all the budgets are strained due to the migrant crisis, and the FDNY has been operating on a bare bones budget, like most municipal operations throughout the country. The strain causes a serious effect on our operational ability. It will, in my opinion, definitely cause the loss of life, and it's something that if we could straighten this out and budgetarily get our house back in order, we can restore our funding to the department. I appreciate the opportunity to speak today. I know I've gone over time. I had a lot more that I would like to get into, but apparently I can't. Time is an issue. I yield to the chairman and finish up. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you for having
Anbro.
me.
I now recognize Mr. Awauda for his 5 minutes to summarize his opening statement.
Good morning, Chair D'Esposito and Ranking Member Carter and the members of the committee. It is my pleasure to discuss protecting our preparedness and our work with you today. I am Murad Awauda, the Executive Director of the New York Immigration Coalition, the nation's oldest and largest immigrant rights organization providing policy, advocacy, coordinated services, and integration support to our 200 members across the state of New York. Immigrant New Yorkers have been at the forefront and the front lines of every emergency and natural disaster our state has faced. They are not only critical to our emergency preparedness, working as first responders, essential workers, and at every level of emergency response infrastructure, they are the backbone of New York's economy and resilience. The challenges we are experiencing today result from 30 years of congressional inaction. Contrary to the framing of this hearing, immigrants are not the problem. They are the key to the solution. For this, Congress should take action to make our immigration system more orderly, predictable, and humane so we do not continue to lurch from one manufactured issue to the next. Stop scapegoating immigrants to divert attention from the true source of the problem we face, congressional paralysis, and recognize that immigration is the leading source of the country's moral, social, and economic strength. In the past 2 centuries, immigration and migration have played a critical role in developing the United States. Immigration to the U.S. has kept our country competitive and a leader in innovation on the world stage. Migration to the U.S. has consistently contributed to our country's social, cultural, and economic fabric, as reflected in my home state of New York. Each era of migration has brought streams of immigrants from Europe, Asia, Latin America, who contributed to the growth of this country and kept the American dream alive. Immigrants, regardless of their status, have contributed some $1.3 trillion in spending power to our nation. New York's immigrant population contributes $140 billion in annual spending power and contributes over $62 billion in taxes combined. Across the state, immigrants are driving our local economies, and when you examine the congressional districts represented on this committee from New York, in New York Congressional District 4, home to over 180,000 immigrants, they contribute $6.3 billion in annual spending power and pay more than $2.9 billion in taxes. In Congressional District 1, home to over 105,000 immigrants, they contribute $4.3 billion in spending power and pay over $2.1 billion in taxes. In New York Congressional District 10, home to over 190,000 immigrants, contributing over $8.6 billion in annual spending power and paying more than $4.4 billion in taxes. These three New York congressional districts' immigrant populations contribute more taxes than the state of Alaska, Wyoming, and South Dakota collected combined in state government tax revenue last year. The U.S. has struggled to handle most emergencies such as floods, wildfires, and natural or man-made disasters. Yet even during these emergencies, immigrants have stepped up to aid our rebuilding and recovery efforts, including during Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, Hurricane Sandy in New York, and the COVID-19 pandemic. Our nation has relied on immigrants of all statuses during these most challenging moments, whether as emergency response team members, medical professionals, agricultural or food service workers, or other areas requiring essential workers. It has been over 35 years since we reformed our immigration system under then-President Ronald Reagan, who eloquently said, "If we ever close the door to new Americans, our leadership in the world would soon be lost." Our immigration system is arcane, and now is the time to finally reform and modernize the system to create a more fair, just, and equitable process, while also creating a pathway for permanent protections for those who already call the U.S. home. While we continue to wait to repair our broken immigration system, these are some steps Congress can and must take right now. In the immediate, Congress should pass existing bills that would begin to address the issues of our immigration system, such as the Registry Bill, H.R. 1511, the Asylum Seeker Worker Authorization Act of 2022, Fairness to Freedom, allocating funds to provide case support services for asylum seekers, fund legal services, fund the Emergency Food and Shelter Program, increase funding for the Shelter and Services Program, support FEMA's Case Management Pilot Program, increase funding for USCIS, processing and backlog reduction. Regardless of immigration status, place of origin, skill level, or language proficiency, immigrants contribute significantly to preserving the American dream. Countless polls show the American people and economy agree. We need many more immigrants if we want our economy to continue to grow and lead. In short, more Americans are good for America. Fixing our antiquated immigration system will require willpower, a functional political system, and a commitment to investing in our country's future. I urge you to implement the outlined recommendations to allow our nation to remain the leader in driving the American people and the world forward. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Awauda. Members will be recognized by order of seniority for their 5 minutes of questioning. An additional round of questioning will be called after all members have been recognized. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questioning. County Executive Blakeman, the major difficulty that communities are facing in New York is where to house migrants. The state of New York's right to shelter law requires cities to provide anyone experiencing homelessness with a bed. At one point, the Nassau Coliseum, right in the heart of Nassau County in my district, was identified as the potential site for housing migrants by New York City officials. However, you have been crystal clear that Nassau County is not a sanctuary county and will not be offering housing or other services to migrants. I know you mentioned it briefly in your opening statement, but can you please elaborate on that decision for a minute?
Well, I think we anticipated early on the problems with the current migrant policy, which many of our residents find to be absolutely bizarre. First of all, we're letting people into the country that we have no idea who they are, where they came from, whether or not they're entitled to asylum status because they haven't had a hearing. And what we've seen is a surge in crime, and we've seen situations where with our firefighters, our volunteer firefighters in Nassau County, we've seen homes that are meant for one family with as many as 8 families in them, which creates a terrible public health crisis and the potential for the types of tragedies in a fire that the gentleman who represents our firefighters mentioned. So we have made a determination not to be a sanctuary county, but that doesn't mean that we're immune to the issues. As I mentioned, the individual that tried to come into our county with enough fentanyl to kill 3 million people was from the Bronx, where they have a sanctuary city program. And they migrate, no pun intended, into Nassau County. They commit crimes, and it's a real burden on our public safety. Our county police department, we've had to reinforce with additional members. We, under my administration, hired 100 new police officers. I am flying back this afternoon to Nassau County, where I'm promoting new police officers because we need more superior officers. And I am hearing from educators in our school districts, many of them from minority communities, who say, we don't have the resources, we don't have the classrooms, we don't have the teachers, and we haven't budgeted for this. So we made a decision in Nassau County not to take part in any sanctuary program, and I think we made the right decision, especially when you see what's going on in New York City and other parts of the country.
I agree, but I think it's crystal clear that the policies set forth by cities like New York City are plaguing other communities that surround them, whether or not they are sanctuary counties or cities or not. Mr. Ansbro, I know you mentioned in your opening statement, and when you finished up, you said that there was so much more to talk about, and that's why we're thankful that you're here today. New York City Mayor Eric Adams estimates that the mounting migrant crisis will cost taxpayers at minimum $12 billion with a B through the end of the fiscal year. As such, he has recently announced sweeping budget cuts across the city, and I know you mentioned some of them in your opening statement, but can you please go into a little bit further detail in the next minute and a half how these budget cuts will affect the FDNY and its ability to serve the people of the city of New York and all who visit?
Thank you. As I recommended, we would having mandatory staffing cuts in engine companies. That's one issue. One of the other issues we're having is they're reducing training. For our members, we're supposed to have, I believe, 100 hours of training per year. They have to cut the amount of training we're going to do. They're taking offline positions and moving them, putting all the offline positions back in the field. A lot of these are training positions, research positions, new tactical positions. Issues that are affecting my members is they have, traditionally we always have members that are injured due to the nature of our work. There are approximately 8,000 firefighters. There's about 1,000 of them currently on light duty. Some of them have 9/11 related illnesses. They've taken the position that they're going to alter the reasonable accommodation policy to limit the number of jobs and start forcing members out that are injured that they can't find a job for. There's approximately 500 offline jobs, and they're looking to limit the RA positions to 125 and basically excess everyone above that number. So we're going to have senior members of the fire department that get injured, get told they're not going back to work, and the fire department saying, well, we used to have jobs for you in training or in R&D, but we're out of positions, now you're going to have to leave. So there's going to be a brain drain in the fire department, and they basically, they're going to balance the budget on the backs of injured firefighters.
So contrary to the comments of many of those that are imposing these budget cuts, it is very clear that they will have devastating effects to the operations of one of the greatest fire departments in the world.
Well, they've already cut staffing in 10% of engine companies, and I made it clear that we don't have the money to increase our capabilities in counterterrorism activities and training.
Thank you. My time has expired, and with that, I recognize the ranking member from Louisiana, Mr. Carter.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Mr. Wadu, contrary to the often crude and dangerous rhetoric that some in the Republican conference push related to immigrants and the current global migration challenges, Surges in migration are not a new phenomenon. We can look back to multiple points in history and see large surges in migration. We can go back to the early 1900s and look at Ellis Island in New York to understand the migration challenges are nothing new. They continue to be exasperated, but they aren't new. Can you put the current migration challenges in context, particularly as it relates to New York's history of migration?
Absolutely, and thank you for that question, Ranking Member Carter. New York is no stranger to immigrants. We have the Statue of Liberty in our harbor. Ellis Island has been a welcoming beacon and processing center up until it was decommissioned. We don't have to go too far back in history. We'll start at 1907, where Ellis Island saw the largest increase in people arriving to New York, with that year seeing 1.2 million people arriving to the New York shores. On April 17th of 1907, it saw the largest arrival date of individuals being processed and registered, with 11,747 people arriving that day. Let's not go that far back. Even in New York's past history in the late 90s to early 2000s, we were seeing over 100,000 people arriving to New York City as well. What's unique about this moment is that approximately half the population that is arriving to New York has no familial community or friend connection, where historically people would have been able to crash on with family or friends, have not been able to do that. Where now they are needing shelter support in this moment. I think another piece here is that we are constantly talking about this moment as a crisis, and it is a moment of challenge, where we see the crisis is an inaction in providing real solutions that are going to change the conditions, the material conditions on the ground across the country, that are going to support people who are seeking their right, their U.S. legal right to seek asylum in the United States. People who are coming here seeking asylum have the right to do so. And by presenting themselves at the southern border or to immigration officials at the border, they are, in fact, seeking their legal right to seek asylum in the United States. And that's step one of the process.
Thank you. Mr. Watto, the Biden administration and Secretary Mayorkas are working together to create an orderly process at the border. There are challenges. I don't think anyone disagrees with that. It's not as easy as it appears. There's a lot of moving parts. Unfortunately, some would rather make this a political tug of war than to find real solutions. Still, some of my Republican friends are hell-bent on pursuing chaos by not passing comprehensive border bipartisan immigration reform. What legislation is needed, in your opinion, and what recommendations do you have to address the current migrant challenge?
First and foremost, we need to actually tackle and finally reform our immigration system. That has been something that has not happened since 1987, as I mentioned earlier, then under President Ronald Reagan, where about 3 million people were provided a pathway to legalization and some of the system and infrastructure was put in. Every single aspect since then has been limiting or constricting immigration policies. We need to actually move very quickly in this moment to put better systems in place, open up at the southern border more regional processing centers, making sure that we're implementing better solutions that are providing supports to communities that are receiving individuals who are coming in seeking asylum or others, and creating multiple pathways for people to come into the U.S. Kudos to the Biden administration for expanding parole and allowing those from Venezuela, Haiti, Cuba, and Nicaragua to apply for the similar program that we created for the Uniting for Ukraine, where we allowed Ukrainians to come into the country, and about several 100,000 have already done so. We need more policies that are going to, A, help the system be more equitable, more fair, and operate smoother. At the same time, we need to move forward in processing applications through USCIS and expediting that process and modernizing our systems.
Thank you. My time is up, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Ranking Member. I now recognize fellow Long Islander, fellow New Yorker, Mr. Lalota.
Thank you to my good friend from Long Island, Chairman D'Esposito, for hosting today's hearing, and to our witnesses, all four from New York, for being here today. Who doesn't love a panel with four New Yorkers on it? But gentlemen, don't waste your time with the pizza here in D.C. It's just not worth it. Chairman, it's no surprise that you, a former NYPD detective, picked such a good topic for today's hearing: protecting our preparedness, assessing the impact of the border crisis on emergency management. Like your Nassau County constituents, Mr. Chairman, my Suffolk County constituents to your immediate east are frustrated by the border and migrant crises, and they fear for their safety. On Long Island, when President Trump was in office, we defeated MS-13 and made Nassau and Suffolk counties safer. We Long Islanders don't want our nation's leaders to put us down that bad path, and we don't want their policies to drag us back to that ugly place. These crises are especially frustrating to Long Island's leaders because the root causes of each of them are beyond our control. And today we have three witnesses who every day are downstream from the policies which have caused America's border crisis and New York City's migrant crisis. Yet, despite their awesome authorities and responsibilities, these talented individuals have no control over the root causes of the crises with which they have to deal. I would posit that our nation's border crisis and New York City's migrant crisis are both crises of choice, of policy choice, crises which stem from two main policy choices. First, President Biden repealing former President Trump's Remain in Mexico policy. By President Biden doing so, migrants, the overwhelming majority of them without valid asylum claims, have been able to enter the United States by the tens of thousands just to disappear into the shadows because most aren't showing up for their asylum court date, which is often 2 years later. The second policy choice, which is causing New York's migrant crisis, are the sanctuary city policies of both New York State and New York City, which prevent city and state law enforcement from enforcing our nation's immigration laws. Mr. Blakeman, sir, thanks for being here. Full disclosure to the committee, one of my first jobs outside the Navy was Mr. Blakeman's campaign manager, but truth be told, I was his overpaid driver and assistant because Mr. Blakeman was and is still very hands-on with everything he does. Good to be with you, Mr. County Executive.
You're no worse for the wear.
I applaud that you've been very clear throughout all this, and Nassau County is not a sanctuary county. You, sir, have had the courage and wisdom that both Mayor Adams and Governor Hochul have lacked throughout this crisis, and your courage and wisdom, sir, is helping to keep Long Islanders safe. I'd like you, sir, Mr. Blakeman, to go into a little more detail about how the migrant crisis has affected crime in Nassau County and the subsequent effect that it has had on police departments and first responders, sir.
Yes, so we have seen an increase in crime basically because you have these organized gangs that are part of the drug cartels from Mexico and other countries who have come to the metropolitan area. They're residing primarily in New York City, and they do cross-border crime. We are just to the east of New York City. And I might add that those who try to characterize this as just a Republican issue, the Democrat county executive of your county, Mr. Lalota, did not create a sanctuary county in Suffolk County. I think common sense people realize that the problem is that we don't know who's coming in, we can't control the numbers, and they are committing crimes. They're also creating burdens on our young people that are devastating. In the United States, over 65,000 young people have overdosed on fentanyl. Where's it coming from? It's coming from south of the border, and many of it's coming from Chinese nationals. I read today that there were 24,000 Chinese nationals that were detained at the border. Those are the ones that were detained. How many got through? We need to secure our borders to make sure that we know who's in this country. We are not anti-immigration, we're for common sense immigration. I could go on and talk about the schools and the burdens that it's placed on our school districts, on our social services, trying to find social services. But I'll tell you one thing that was really something that stood out to me. Flying down here last night through LaGuardia Airport, I talked with an airport employee. I used to be a commissioner of the Port Authority. We ran that airport. And that person was telling me that when migrants come to LaGuardia Airport. They're escorted by airport personnel to a place where they can get a voucher for a hotel, a voucher for food, and a free Uber ride to anywhere they want to go. This is taking away resources that we desperately need to take care of our own citizens. And it's done without federal programs and federal money, and it's done without knowing who's coming in. We need to secure our borders, then we can have a guest worker program where we have immigration that's controlled, we know who's coming in, and we can have people in this country that want to work hard, and we want to compensate them, and if they want to stay in this country and have a path to citizenship, that's fine. If they want to go back to their country, that's fine. But we need to know who they are, we need to know how many are coming in, and we need to make sure that they're not criminals.
And thank you, Mr. Blakeman. Your testimony is informative. I've run out of time, but I want to say thank you for informing members. You know, we from New York, we get it. You know, there's folks from across the nation who are on this panel today from both sides of the aisle. They need to hear feedback like this so they understand the impact of these federal policies that they have on good suburban folks who just want to be safe. And I appreciate you being here today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Lalota. I now recognize also from New York, Mr. Goldman for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am from New York City, and as I sit here today, I would expect that this would be a really powerful hearing for the New York City Council, but not clear why it's one in the Congress of the United States, which seems to be fixated on New York. Another bill we had last week was totally focused only as a messaging bill only on New York. I appreciate that our witnesses are buddies of the chairman, but respectfully, none of you, other than Mr. Awade, have any expertise about immigration policy. And I've been listening to what you've had to say, and I just want to go through a couple of things so that we can make sure that our facts are correct. Mr. Blakeman, you are aware that every single migrant who has come through the New York City, the Roosevelt Hotel, has been vetted at the border, are you not?
They have not, sir.
Yes, they have.
In my
The ones who have gone
Sir, can
through
I
official
answer?
channels through the city
Sir, may I answer your
have
question?
been vetted at the border. I mean, that's a fact.
You asked me a question.
I'm
Would you like
asking
the
if you
answer?
know or not.
Would you like the answer?
Let me ask
sir?
you another question. Are you aware?
You gonna let me
that,
ask you-
No, I'm
answer
not.
the
I'm
first
not going to
one?
let you because you already answered it.
No, I didn't.
Are you aware that the proportion of migrants who have come through New York City who commit crimes is far lower than the general population?
Sir, I would not agree with your facts. I have spoken extensively with our police commissioner, who has indicated to me that because of the migrant policy, there has been a spike in crimes, especially organized burglaries.
Wait, sorry,
that are being done.
The commissioner, which?
Commissioner Patrick Ryder, we have the finest
from
police
where?
department
From where?
in the United States.
From where?
He is a commissioner who was appointed by a Democratic county executive, and I retained him.
What county?
The greatest county in America, Nassau County.
Okay, well, let me tell you, in New York
You
City,
visit once in a while.
in New York City, where almost all of these migrants are, the crime is much, much lower among the migrant community than it is among the general
I
population.
don't know where you get your facts
Now,
from, sir.
Go check it out. We're in a public hearing. You can check it out. Mr. Blakeman, let me continue. Oh, Mr. Ansbro, you indicated to me that one of the real issues, or you indicated to us, one of the real issues that the fire department is having is budget cuts. Mr. Blakeman, I think you said just a minute ago that one of the problems that the city of New York and the state of New York is having is that there is very little federal money flowing to help with the migrants who are coming. Is that right?
That would be Mayor Adams' testimony, not mine.
Okay.
I agree with
I mean, all right, you just
I
said
agree with
it.
him, but Mayor Adams
You just said it.
that.
Now, you're aware there's a
Democrat.
program, there's a federal program called the Shelter and Services Program that can reimburse localities and states for expenditures on immigration. Are you not aware of that program?
I think they provide a very small part of the financing and funding that would be needed.
I agree. Which is why, if we had Republican support, we could increase the funding in the Shelter and Services Program so that the federal government could offset the expenditures of New York City and of the state of New York through the Shelter and Services Program so that we would not have to have budget cuts to the FDNY. But you want to know what the problem is? In H.R. 2, their prized border security bill, it cuts all funding for the Shelter and Services Program. You know what else H.R. 2 does? It cuts all funding for legal counsel for unaccompanied minors. And, not surprisingly, it does not mention guns. Now, Mr. Blakeman, you've discussed, as several of you have, the scourge of the fentanyl trade that is going on in our country, and I agree with you. It is really bad. And we've had testimony from actual experts on this over the course of the last year who have made it very clear that the Mexican drug cartels are the ones who control the fentanyl trade at the border. And unfortunately, the Mexican drug cartels have that authority because they possess guns and weapons of war. But unfortunately, those weapons of war come from American manufacturers, not from Mexico or elsewhere. I have introduced a bill called the Disarming Cartels Act, which is designed to curb the exportation of weapons manufactured by American companies to the drug cartels, which fuels the fentanyl trade operation. There's not yet one Republican co-sponsor. I would urge my colleagues on the other side to recognize that the source of power of the cartels who control the fentanyl trade comes from American-made guns, and we need to stop that exportation, and I hope my Republican colleagues will join us in that effort. I yield back.
Well, thank you, Mr. Goldman, and I just want to take the opportunity to remind everyone that we are at the Committee on Homeland Security, Subcommittee on Emergency Management and Technology, and the title of this hearing is Protecting Our Preparedness, Assessing the Impact of the Border Crisis on Emergency Management. This is not an immigration hearing, nor are we focusing on immigration. We're focused on the failed policies of Secretary Mayorkas and Joe Biden, and I would like to thank the 3 Republican witnesses who I believe are experts on emergency management and handling this crisis. But thank you very much for your comments, Mr. Goldman. I now represent from the great state of Alabama, Mr. Strong.
Thank you. Sheriff Favreau, as you mentioned in your testimony, there's been a recognizable increase in 911 calls across your county over the last 2 years. As a retired assistant fire chief, firefighter, EMT myself for over 39 years, I know how challenging this job is under normal circumstances. When you add the influx of millions of illegal aliens into our communities, it only increases that pressure on those leadership. It's hard to imagine how some of our first responders are keeping their heads above water. Like much of northern New York, my district has many rural communities with limited resources and manpower. These communities are not able to handle the sudden increase in emergency calls like you mentioned in your testimony. Law enforcement and emergency services personnel, particularly in border states, have reported that the influx of illegal immigrants arriving at the border is straining the system, whether it's first responders taking emergency 911 calls or sending ambulances to illegal aliens in need, with hospitals inundated by non-U.S. citizens. Sheriff, can you talk more about what you are seeing and the strain that this administration's border policies are having on emergency services like in your county?
Yes, thank you, sir. First of all, let me clarify in law enforcement the fact of the unknown. Going into the dark, going into the woods, we've heard different issues and different comments and opinions on firearms and weapons. You're walking into these situations with zero information. Now, when you exacerbate that with dealing with somebody who decided to illegally enter the country and crawl on their stomachs through the woods, through swamps, wetlands, and marshlands to be able to get to the United States, what is the desperation that that person may be going through, and what are they dealing with? All of these create more and more unknowns for not just law enforcement, but for our EMTs, our firefighters that assist us. We've had a couple rescue missions lately up along the northern border where you go from a wooded area to swamp areas that are probably knee to thigh deep In the cold weathers, when these start to freeze up, it becomes very, very dangerous. These people get trapped in the swamps, and we end up having to go out and do rescue missions. In most cases, it's volunteer staff that we're working with our EMTs and our fire services, which makes it even more difficult to come out. So it puts a strain not only on the volume of calls in taking away those emergency responders from other necessities within the community, but it also puts an additional mental health risk on the responders that are going to these situations.
Thank you, Sheriff. I can relate. I come from a volunteer fire department that runs 2,200 calls a year with average response time of 5 minutes. Have you ever seen conditions like this in your time as a result of this invasion at our southern border? How is it affecting your jail cost, your medical costs, corrections officers, and burnout?
I'll answer it in reverse. Starting with the jail, we are seeing a significant increase. After bail reform in New York State, our jail population went down significantly. We were averaging about 100 to 105 detainees on a given day. That went up to about 160 to 170 about 2 years ago because we have a contract with the United States Border Patrol. I believe we are the only county jail left in the state of New York that will house Border Patrol detainees. And I'll say revenue, but the cost is approximately $112 a night, results in over $2 million a year that is paid out for the detention at our facility. There are multiple barriers there because now in New York, you're well aware, we have the MAP program, the Medicaid Assistant Treatment for Detainees, and that's trying to be pushed over to our federal inmates as well. That becomes a little bit of a problem because you don't know the medical history, you don't know the background, and it can create more of a hazard and liability for the jail. That creates a great frustration for our staff. The burnout and the frustration comes from the language barriers. We are firm believers that we are not jurors, we are not judges, we are there to create a safe, secure, and humane detention for these people until they are dealt with a further part of the process.
Thank you, Sheriff. And in my last 20, 30 seconds, Mr. Awada, you stated we need more immigrants. Where would you like them? Where would you like them to be sent to?
Well,
You say you need more immigrants. I'll tell you this right here. I've spent a lot of time in New York over the last couple of months. I was there this last weekend, met with hundreds of people from New York. I didn't have one that said send us more illegal aliens to New York. I want to know if you want more illegal aliens, tell me where you want them and how many do you want?
Well, Congressman, this is kind of endemic of the rhetoric we've been hearing, right? Is we have had a population loss in the state of New York because of the COVID-19 pandemic and then people leaving the state of New York. We need a stronger workforce.
How many do you want and where do you want them?
Sir, that's kind of like a question that doesn't...
You don't want them and the people of New York don't want them, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Having people...
Thank you, Mr. Strong. I now recognize my good friend from California, Mr. Correa, for 5 minutes.
I want to thank you very much for holding this hearing, and I want to thank our guests today. You know, we're policymakers and like to hear different perspectives on issues because try to approximate some good public policy, and all of us can add to the discussion. So I thank the four of you for being here today. Frustrating right now, the challenges we have. Washington Post article last week says record 15% of our population now, immigrants. Last time we had this situation was the turn of the century when it got to 14.8%. 15% of our population. Had dinner with the ambassador of Germany last week as well, the day after this article came out. Said, Lou, Germany, it's 20%. 20%. And I would say right now we have a challenge, worldwide challenge. COVID devastated economies around the world. U.S. is probably the only one that came out hitting on all 8 cylinders. Well, the only economy right now that's pushing the rest of the world. You mentioned Chinese. Unemployment among China's youth through the roof. Mr. Blakeman, I used to be a county commissioner, county supervisor in Orange County. And that, sir, fact is the best county in the United States. We also made history 20, 30 years ago, making history by being the county with the biggest bankrupt county in the United States. We had to declare bankruptcy. It wasn't because of immigrants, it was because of management. You mentioned something, sir, and let me ask you, securing the border, sealing the borders. Can you define for me, what do you envision as securing the border? What is a secure border?
Well, a secure border has a wall that people can't get through. It has a vetting process that if someone is asking for asylum status.
I only have a couple of minutes, so we've never had that in this country. We've never had what you envisioned. But I just wanted to get a picture of what you were thinking about. You mentioned you went to LaGuardia, you had the workers there say, these folks come in, they get a voucher, they get this, they get that. And one thing they don't get is a work permit. And I say this because when you talk about, I believe my colleague from Alabama said, where do you want these immigrants to go? Right now, there's a lot of folks, a lot of companies in the U.S. that are looking for workers. The challenge is we don't give them work permits. And that's on this administration, that we let Ukrainians in as refugees. They're not seeing it as a problem because they get, as they walk across the border, they're given a work visa, 2 years. I think anybody who wants to come to this country, I agree with you in general, gentlemen, should come here to work, not be on the dole, not be here to get some free benefit, but earn it. We got to give them a work permit. In my district, biggest employer, Disneyland, 22,000 direct jobs. Tourism, 40, 50,000 jobs. A lot of immigrants working. That's what we need right now. We need workers in this country. We need to figure out an immigration system so we get people that contribute as taxpayers. And if I can, I only have a minute left. Love to continue to talk here, but Mr. Awander, do immigrants pay taxes?
Of course.
Social Security tax.
Social Security, Medicaid.
And they're never going to get any
local,
benefits, Social Security.
federal taxes.
And Mr. Hansbrough, I want to say thank you for your service as a firefighter. 911, that day is etched into my memory. Everybody running away from those burning buildings, firefighters, police officers running into those buildings. Thank you. I used to be a California legislator. We passed 3% at 50 because we know firefighters have a tough job. They got to retire early because those bodies can't take it. I also sponsored workers' compensation presumptions. You get hurt, certain hurts, it's presumed it's on the job, and we take care of you. So I would ask you to look at that in New York. I don't know what the state of the local state legislature is, but those are the kind of jobs that need protection from the state legislature to make sure we honor your good work. Mr. Chairman, I yield. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Correa. I now recognize from Oklahoma, Mr. Burkeen, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the witnesses. I think all of us know that we're experiencing a crisis at our southern border. I think to pretend or to look at this and not just see the common sense reality is, as New York City Mayor said, our compassion in this nation is limitless, but our resources are not. And we're running $2 trillion deficits. And I'm astounded that the answer from some is they believe, well, let's just give New York City and these high population centers more money. From where? From where? Because the entire discretionary budget right now for the federal government is $1.7 trillion. If you look at last year, $1.7 trillion was our entire 12 appropriation bill number. What was our deficit last year? $1.7 trillion. 100% of everything that we're spending money on, absent the mandatory side, of Medicare and Social Security and Medicaid and food stamps. On the mandatory side, 100% of everything we talk about up here, let's give them more money, is borrowed money from our kids and our grandkids. And really what we're saying is we're going to give you something that's going to come from our children. We're going to lower their standard of living. Mr. Blakeman, let me ask you a question, because I'm going off my notes here because I'm astounded. Can illegal immigrants in New York vote?
In New York City, I believe they passed a law. Luckily, we don't have that law in Nassau County, but in the city council and mayoral races, I believe illegal aliens recently have been given the right to vote.
Let me follow up with that. So if you are of the persuasion we need more of them, and they're aligned with your politics, let's say on the Democrat side, is it to your benefit if you live in those areas where illegals are casting their vote for you? Politically, is it to your benefit to have these ideologies of just allow more to come in regardless of the cost?
Well, absolutely not. And I think it's always to the benefit of Americans and to America, whether it's a local race, a state race, or a federal race, that you be a United States citizen.
Yeah.
You actually be a citizen and you take the oath that you pledge to defend and support the Constitution of the United States.
But do you see that there are some, we'll say, Democrats that would want this type policy because it helps them stay in office because they have illegals that vote for them?
It definitely changes the voting pool in favor of those who would let anybody in.
Let me follow up with this, just because I want people in New York, for the characteristics that you all are seeing. We know the numbers tell us it's costing the state of New York $10 billion a year right now. It's costing approximately $6 billion a year, Eric Adams said, the mayor of New York City, just the cost of New York City, $10 billion to the state, and it's costing New Jersey $5 billion a year. So the state annually, the state of New York's cost them 10, New Jersey is costing them 5. Do the simple math, that's $15 billion. Under the Trump administration, by the way, which we had in 2017, a 45-year low of illegal immigration. 45-year low in 2017 of illegal immigration. No change of laws, just leadership. Now we have historic highs that we've never seen in this country. The $15 billion that the state of New York and New Jersey have spent, that built 400-mile of border wall or systems under the Trump administration, that same amount of dollars. So here we're playing defense on an annual basis, the cost of the taxpayer in New York and New Jersey. And there's some common sense, glaring abilities to secure our southern border that are a better spend of our taxpayer resources. The police department. Is it about a 4% cut to New York, 4 to 10, and you all are expecting anywhere from 4 to a 10% cut to your police department because of the cost that's going to be sent your way? Is that the expected cost of?
5% cuts across the board in the first round. The mayor is expecting to implement a second round. He has said that first responders will be immune in the second round, but he has not committed to any further, third or fourth round, because he believes he's going to continue to have cuts, another 5%.
So I'm reading right here, and it says New York Mayor Adams is expecting these cuts may be up to 15%, may be as much as 15%.
3 rounds. We just got the first round and the second round.
So I'm going to end with this. How many people are you taking off emergency first responders, police, and whoever wants to answer this question, because my time is limited, are we better prepared if a security threat comes to New York City because of these decisions, or less prepared? Whoever wants to answer that question.
Well, we are less prepared because we don't know who's coming to this country, and they haven't been vetted, and there's a lot of people that have come into this country that have nefarious intent. And I believe that we need a program where we know who's coming into this country, and we vet them before they come in, and that if someone wants asylum and they're entitled to it, they should get it. But they need to have a hearing and they need to be properly vetted. Otherwise, with open borders, it creates a terrible public safety crisis.
Thank you, Mr. Blakeman. I yield, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Burkeen. I now recognize we are clearly Long Island strong here this morning. Mr. Garbarino from New York.
Yeah, we got everybody who's currently in Congress from Long Island here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all the witnesses for coming. Mr. Ansbrough, I want to talk to you first, President Ansbrough. We've spoken about the cuts to manpower you talked about in your open testimony. I want you to talk about the fifth man. Yeah, not every firehouse has a fifth firefighter. I believe currently 20 of the 149 do. Why do they have a fifth firefighter?
Well, the fifth firefighter had traditionally been on staff due to the nature of how long it would take to get a hose line in place. As fire service decreased during the 80s, they kept dropping the amount of firefighters down. But in the past 20 years, the population of New York City has increased by 1 million people. The run totals have gone through the roof. When I got to Harlem, it was one of the busiest companies in the city of New York. We had 4,000 runs a year. That company is now doing 6,000 runs a year. So the fifth firefighter has traditionally been used in the busiest areas to work on the hose line to get the hose in place. Sometimes the fifth firefighter would be placed in an engine company to assist because they know they wouldn't have a truck company coming. So they would have the fifth firefighter operate the forcible entry tools to get into the building. By removing those, there are going to be areas of the city that have high population centers that are going to be short on staffing for getting hose line in place. As I mentioned, the Bronx fire, where 17 people were killed 2 years ago. 2 of the 4 engines in the first assignment would have had an additional firefighter in them. It would have put the fire out faster and probably assisted in getting people out of that stairwell where the 17 people died, would have assisted getting them out faster. In areas where they have not as many engine companies around, we'll lose out on the forcible entry aspect of it, and it will slow down operations. And also by removing this, as I said, it's a manpower pool where if we do go down a person in one area, they can use that person. They'll have to pull someone off the truck, which is basically they search for victims.
So every firehouse used to have it, then that brought that down.
Absolutely.
Now the busiest and the most dangerous firehouses still have it, but with these cuts, sounds like no one's going to have it
Absolutely.
anymore.
There's actually 2 firehouses in Midtown Manhattan that have them, and they have them because, as you know, the traffic aspect, the second engine company may not get there for 10 minutes. It's a long time. You can't get anywhere in the city, so they're removing that staffing as well in Midtown.
So these cuts are actually going to put people's lives at risk because, like you said, the fire 2 years ago, 17 people died because 2 of the probably could have been put out faster. If all these trucks had 5 firefighters, we're now going to cut every fire department from having them. It's just going to make the city less safe and even put our firemen in harm's way.
Absolutely. It's an increased risk to us as well.
Gets rid of the buddy system, right?
Absolutely. But also, the longer a fire is allowed to grow, the more difficult it is to fight, and we see more injuries with that. But as of Saturday, 10% of the engine companies in New York City have seen a 20% reduction in staffing.
It's a disaster. I'm sorry that you're dealing with it, and we're going to try to do what we can to help, but until they change the policies at the border, it's going to make things just keep getting more and more difficult. Thank you for your service. Mr. Blakeman, I wanted to, good to see you down here, and I wanted to ask you a question. Can you talk a little bit more about the increase in crime that you've seen in Nassau County and the focus on the police force and what they're seeing and what they're dealing with?
Yeah, like most large police departments, we have a detective bureau that has what's known as a pattern burglary squad. And some of the patterns that we found on the burglaries of residential and commercial properties have been done by migrants who came here through the current migrant policy. They've come here owing the cartels a great deal of money to transport them over the border. And if they don't pay that money, I've been told that their families would be seriously harmed, if not killed, in their native country. And therefore, they need quick money, and they need to get it fast. So they're engaging in all kinds of crimes, burglary, shoplifting, and both commercial and residential burglaries. And it has become a burden on our police department. And I just want to supplement, what happens in New York City has an effect also on Nassau County. We send hundreds of thousands of people into New York City each day from Nassau County. So if there's a diminution in the ranks of the firefighters or the police officers, it presents a safety problem for Nassau County residents. And many of the firefighters and cops live in Nassau County. So it's a problem for us as well, not just for New York City.
Yeah, can you talk quickly about the fentanyl arrest that you just had in Nassau County?
There was enough pure fentanyl to kill close to 3 million people, which would have been the whole population of Long Island. We know it came in through south of the border, and we know it came in through this illegal migration policy.
And the person arrested was he not
Person arrested,
undocumented?
migrated, yes. They came from south of the border, resided in the Bronx, which is a sanctuary city, and did a crossover crime here in Nassau County. And the distribution was also going to be in your county, Mr. Garbarino, not just in Nassau County.
I've got them both, Nassau and Suffolk, but I'm out of time, and I'm honored to be here as a guest. But thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Garbarino. I now recognize, also from New York, Mr. Lawler for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. County Executive Blakeman, in March of this year, County Executive Ed Day from Rockland County and I held a press conference about the migrant crisis in New York and its impact on our county government, specifically on the cost for health and human services, the social safety net programs, the impacts on nonprofit organizations. A county like Rockland has about 340,000 residents. It's the smallest geographic county outside the city of New York, so it's densely populated. But we have no cities. We don't have a shelter in the county. And so Eric Adams decided he was going to start sending migrants to hotels in Rockland County and Orange County and other counties across the state. What has been the impact on Nassau County in terms of its nonprofit organizations that the county does work with on, housing, shelter, food? What has been the direct cost impact on Nassau County with the migrant crisis?
Thank you, Mr. Lawler. Well, the impact has not been nearly as great as other areas because we are not a sanctuary county. We will not participate in any migrant program. What we have seen is an increase in crime. We've seen an increase in social services. Basically, our social services right now are pretty stretched, and we have seen migrants who've come over through New York City into Nassau County. And obviously, if it's a humanitarian situation where someone needs immediate assistance, we don't turn people away. We make sure they're stabilized, but then we do not provide shelter as does New York City. So our issues are not as profound only because we made the choice not to be part of the sanctuary program. So when you see what's going on in New York City and you see what's going on in other cities around the United States that have accepted this migrant program, they are all under severe stress. I talk with county executives from other parts of the country, and they're all under this financial stress as well as the stress on their people who provide the services, who now are having to work overtime and do double shifts, as we talked about, as the sheriff here has mentioned. We've heard of a lot of situations like that.
Thank you. Mr. Awade, is New York City a sanctuary city?
New York City, in theory, is a sanctuary city, which means that it is sanctuary. I think is being misconstrued here. It's actually a public safety measure.
With all due respect, I just asked very simply: is New York City a sanctuary city? Is that the policy that was enacted? Does New York City refuse to cooperate with ICE and law enforcement when it comes to immigrants?
New York City cooperates with ICE,
Do they?
USCIS, Border Patrol.
What is their level of cooperation, to your knowledge?
They have the joint task force that they work together on. They also work together within the confines of the NYPD. They also have a list of, and what you're referring to is what I think you're trying to get to, is the detainers policy, where there's a set list of low-level offenses that New York City does not transfer ICE requested administrative notices of people who were in DOC custody to ICE without a judicial warrant. New York City does provide anyone that ICE or whoever from the federal government has a judicial warrant for to said agency.
Does New York City have a right to shelter law that they?
Yes, and today's its birthday. It's 42 years old, and that has been what has kept most folks off of our streets, keeping as many people as possible, as healthy as possible in the winter months, yeah.
So do you agree on its 42nd anniversary, do you agree with Mayor Adams when he says that this migrant crisis is destroying New York City because of the cost to the city to adhere to this right to shelter law. Do you agree or disagree?
Absolutely disagree. When the administration
Should
came in, they
so-
had $5
so-
billion that was being
Reclaiming my time. When it comes to the decisions of New York City to be a sanctuary city, to not cooperate with ICE to its fullest, to interpret the right to shelter to mean that anyone who comes to New York City, regardless of status, is entitled to housing, do you think that should apply nationwide?
Your question is, should
Yeah, do you think that's good policy, and do you think that's something that should be applied nationwide?
for city states and counties that want to provide the most care for their populations, absolutely. If they want to ensure that when folks fall on hard times or need a little bit of support, that they get that from their local governments, absolutely, why not?
So you think it's going well in New York City?
I think that we can be doing better in New York City, and we can be doing better with support from the federal government and providing more resources to the city and the state of New York.
Yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Lawler. I now recognize from New York, Mr. Langworthy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate the opportunity to join this subcommittee hearing today to discuss the real-life consequences of open border and sanctuary policies. Under New York Governor Kathy Hochul, New York City Mayor Eric Adams, our Democrat-run state has become a haven for illegal immigration that has had a devastating impact on our finances and put public safety and public health at risk. I want to thank one of our panelists testifying here today, Mr. Blakeman, for being a voice of common sense in a sea of nonsense in New York State. You have done a tremendous job since you were sworn in as county executive, and I want to salute you for that.
Thank you.
The cost of New Yorkers is on pace to total $12 billion by 2025. In New York City, tax-paying citizens, they are now facing draconian cuts to public safety and education to pay for this self-made crisis. And though the southern border is 2,000 miles away from leftist-run New York City and is on the other end of the state from my district in western New York in the southern tier, this crisis has arrived on our doorstep as well and the doorsteps of every county in the state of New York. This year, 5 of my 7 counties within New York's 23rd congressional district have been forced to pass emergency declarations as the influx of illegal migrants has overwhelmed our communities and strained our resources. Now, prior to this influx of migrants, many upstate counties were already struggling under these far-left policies that have put an incredible economic strain on our local governments, our property taxpayers, and our businesses. The people of my district, they didn't want to pay for this crisis, yet they're being forced to shoulder the burden. Sheriff Favreau, your county, Clinton County in the North Country, has a lot of similarities to my district, including weather. Now, let's say our climate's not quite what it is on the southern border. You mentioned that in your testimony that the struggle is just to provide adequate clothing for migrants who are being relocated to your county from the south. This is just one small aspect of the cost, but can you elaborate any further on how the influx of illegal migrants has strained your county's resources, particularly on the law enforcement and first responder end?
Well, as we've heard from everybody, resources have been dwindling. Costs that counties will dish out has been dwindling. So therefore, the staffing is shorter than it was 2 years ago, 3 years ago. The mental health status on all emergency responders has increased. I've seen nothing like it except for our 9/11 tragedy. And certainly I hope that we don't have to wait for something like that to happen again before we can open our eyes and say, what are we going to do about this? What we're seeing is the responses from not just volunteer firefighting services, but all of our law enforcement. We're seeing partnerships try and develop because we know there should be no politics in law enforcement. We are here to protect and serve every resident and guest of our respective counties. And I say that on behalf of all 3,000 plus sheriffs across the country. That is our job. That is our sworn duty. And to enter politics in to formulate an opinion, even as was insinuated earlier, I think I'm the only Democrat on this board. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. The decisions I make, the work I do is based upon what is best for the people in my community and my fellow colleagues in all areas of law enforcement. And those are the decisions that we make. And and we have to continue to do that. We're just asking for support to be able to get that component of our job done. I don't think that's a lot to ask.
Thank you very much for your professionalism. Law enforcement in my own district has spoken in very similar fashion about how this crisis has impacted their ability to operate and to keep our community safe, on top of New York's elimination of cash bail and discovery reform. Now, you mentioned in your testimony that the federal government, particularly DHS, Department of Homeland Security, has left communities like yours in Clinton County to their own devices to operate using state and local resources to deal with this crisis. Are you seeing enough assistance coming from the state to make up for the lack of help from DHS?
In short, I could say no. We do get state law enforcement terrorism prevention program funds. The amounts that we get are very, very small, and the little bit of equipment that we can purchase. We have a special response team that's a tri-county team that we actually put together due to a lot of volunteer work from the members of Clinton, Essex, and Franklin counties to be able to respond to emergency situations. They end up doing their own private fundraising and taking money out of their pockets to provide life-saving equipment for the teams.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate your testimony and being here today. Finally, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to enter into the record today a letter I led with my colleagues in the Northern Border Security Caucus to Secretary Mayorkas, as well as the response received to the letter from the Department of Homeland Security.
Without objection, Mr. Langworthy.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, and I now recognize from New York, Mr. Molinaro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your leadership and certainly your service and allowing me to wave on to the subcommittee today. County Executive Blakeman, it's a pleasure to see you again. As you know, I spent 12 years serving as a county executive in the Mid-Hudson Valley. And without question, over the course of the last several years, but certainly most acutely over the last several months, the issue of confronting the migrant crisis that New York City has faced has become now a statewide crisis, and you've spoken to this. All of our panelists have spoken to this. Despite suggesting otherwise, it is a crisis. It's a crisis on a number of levels. Can I ask you, sir, just to reinforce, and I know you've testified this to some degree already, New York City's designation as a sanctuary city, self-designation, do you feel that that has had a significant impact on the migrant crisis as Nassau County is experiencing it?
Yes, absolutely. As I mentioned, one of the major problems that we have is what we call crossover crime. Crime that comes from New York City into our county, and much of it is due to the migrant policies that allow people into this country that may be associated with the drug cartels, people who may be selling fentanyl. As I indicated, we had an arrest in Nassau County with fentanyl that could kill close to 3 million people. And it has had a deleterious effect on quality of life in New York City. Our Nassau County residents who work in the city come back every day and tell us that. The situation with the homeless, the situation with crime in New York City is out of control. And we are just stemming the tide in Nassau County because we're on the eastern border. And we are ramping up our police services so that we can meet that burden. But the fact of the matter is it's a very misguided policy, and it's not well thought out. And I think it's hurting our country. It's definitely hurting local government. And when you have to house close to 1,000 people in a mental health facility on the border of Nassau County in Queens, I mean, just think about it. Are we doing the right thing by bringing people into this country? They're not vetted, we don't know who they are, and we put them in a mental health facility?
Well, certainly, Mr. County Executive, you and I agree on that. Sheriff Favreau, would you suggest that New York City's designation as a sanctuary city and the state, by extension, adopting similar policies has had an effect, certainly in your home county?
Well, I think what we've seen pretty much in our home county is we've seen a couple busloads that have been shipped from New York City up to Clinton County with some McDonald's food certificates and telling them of promise of jobs and opportunities, of which every community, I think, across the country has jobs that are available for qualified, documented individuals.
So let me ask you this, Sheriff, and I apologize. I want to try to keep to my time as best I can. Does New York City's right to shelter law have enforcement capacity in your home county, yes or no?
I couldn't speak to that directly.
County Executive, do you believe that New York City's right to shelter law extends to Nassau County?
I do not believe it does.
So with that being said, knowing that the city of New York continues to move undocumented migrants to other communities, County Executive Blakeman, has the city of New York adequately communicated its strategy to move individuals into your home county?
We have been in contact with the City of New York and the State of New York, officials of both jurisdictions, and we have told them that we are not a sanctuary county and that we will not accept any migrant program that they may be trying to initiate in Nassau County.
Sheriff, has the city of New York adequately communicated with you their strategy to move migrants into your community?
No, not at all.
Has the city of New York Sheriff coordinated with you for the transport of migrants into your home county?
Not with me.
County Executive Blakeman, has the city of New York coordinated the movement of migrants into your home county in an adequate fashion with you?
They have not.
Mr. Awada, can I ask you a question? Do you think that New York City's right to shelter law extends to override local law in counties outside of the city of New York?
Well,
Yes,
local
yes or no?
laws are
Just yes or no? I'm sorry? Yes or no?
To answer your question,
Yes or no?
the Office of Temporary OTDA, which is a state agency,
Is that a yes?
regulates homeless shelters. And when a city or municipality or locality or county were to be
I'm going to
at
reclaim my time.
capacity,
I'm going to take that.
they are able to use other jurisdictions as long as they're coordinating, which in this regard,
Thank you.
hear that the city had not adequately done that.
Okay.
Mr. Molinaro, you reclaimed your time. Go ahead.
I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to assert that the city of New York hasn't communicated, hasn't coordinated, and has exasperated a humanitarian crisis of its own making into communities all across the state of New York without care or concern for the well-being of the very individuals it suggests it's trying to care for. And that is not legal in the state of New York and should not be sustained. I yield.
Well, thank you, Mr. Molinaro. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questioning, and I will comment on that. When you talk about communication, just days after New York City had proposed moving or sheltering migrants in an empty warehouse at JFK Airport, I reached out to the mayor's office and scheduled a meeting at JFK Airport to get an understanding of what this shelter would look like and how it would play out. You'd figure a member of the Homeland Security Committee, a member of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, two of the committees with jurisdiction over one of the largest transportation hubs in the country, you think it would be a good idea to have an open line of communication. As I do rarely agree with Mayor Adams, but I do agree that this issue is going to destroy New York City. So his communication has been terrible, and the communication not only between the mayor's office and other municipalities, but I think one of the biggest and the one most devastating, and the one that we're focusing on today, is the fact that there's little communication between law enforcement and public safety agencies. That's where the problem is going to lie. I've had this conversation with County Executive Blakeman and Commissioner Ryder, and I know that Mr. Lota and Mr. Garbarino in Suffolk share the same concerns. One of the biggest issues that we're facing right now are the number of gotaways that are coming across our southern border, individuals that are on that terror watch list. We don't know where they are, what they're doing, or who they're with, and they, without a doubt, are causing a direct concern, and they are a threat to our national security. So I have some questions, Mr. Awada, just of a testimony that you've made. So I don't know if you use your opening statement or one of the first questions, you said that immigrants are not the problem.
Yes.
Well, that's probably the only thing that we agree on here today. Immigrants are the problem. The problem that we're facing today is the failed policies of Joe Biden and Secretary Mayorkas. It's the fact that they have been derelict in their duty to protect this great homeland. That's where the problem lies. You mentioned that President Biden deserves, your words, not mine, kudos. He deserves zero kudos. In fact, this country is less safe under his failed leadership than ever before. That's what we're seeing at our southern border. Now, you reside in the 5 boroughs, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you mentioned that we need more policies, ones that are more fair, more equitable.
Yes, and reforming our immigration system as a whole.
But the problem is that the policies that were in place have been rescinded by the Biden administration. They're not being followed by Secretary Mayorkas. They're not fair. They're not equitable. And he definitely doesn't deserve kudos. That's the issue that we're facing here. And today, for this subcommittee hearing, what we're focused on is how the failed policies, how our open border is affecting public safety. How people like County Executive Blakeman continues to wake up every morning and make sure that the 1.4 million people who reside in Nassau County are kept safe. How he makes sure that the Nassau County Police Department, the 71 volunteer fire departments, emergency management and others, how they have all the resources that they need. How the sheriff makes sure that the men and women who serve under them have everything that they need to keep themselves safe. How Mr. Ansbro goes to work each and every day representing one of the greatest fire departments in this world, but is dealing with historic budget cuts because of those failed policies. So I am going to ask you, and it's a very simple yes or no question. Do you believe that the city of New York and the surrounding communities are safer in the situation that we're in with the open border? It's a yes or no question.
The city of New York is safer as crime stats illustrate.
You believe that the city of New York is safer?
That is what the NYPD says, and if you don't think that what the NYPD is saying is true...
I served in the NYPD. I wore that uniform. I wore that shield on my chest every single day, and I will tell you that New Yorkers and the people who wear that uniform now do not think the city is safer. And Mr. Ansbro, I would like to ask you, we're not only talking about safer in crime, we're talking about are they safer because we have the resources and the public safety apparatus to keep people safe. Mr. Ansbro, do you think New Yorkers are safer today?
Absolutely not.
Okay. And they're not safer, why?
Lack of resources, a lack of staffing.
Right. And
Staff the police department and fire department appropriately.
right. And just a couple of weeks ago, Mayor Adams announced, I still have time, and Mayor Adams announced a couple of weeks ago that he is not putting NYPD police officer academy classes in place because he can't afford them. We just went through an entire 2 hours of talking about how minimum staffing is being cut because of the budget cuts. We're talking about city agencies up and down that are being cut. There is no way possible that the city of New York and the surrounding communities, like County Executive Blakeman mentioned, dealing with people smuggling fentanyl and other illegal drugs, people conducting burglary patterns. The sheriff mentioned the issues that they're facing. It is clear this issue, the failed policies of Joe Biden and Secretary Mayorkas, our open border has caused chaos amongst public safety, the public safety world in this country. With that, my time has expired. I recognize the ranking member.
Mr. Chairman, before you proceed, can I excuse myself? I have a police promotion ceremony back in Nassau County.
Absolutely. Mr. County Executive, thank you for being here. Safe home and God bless.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Chairman, respectfully, I would ask as a matter of parliamentary procedure that we refrain from insults to the President of the United States. I would say this, if a Republican or a Democrat, it's a matter of courtesy, it's a matter of rule, it's a matter of our parliamentary practices. Moving forward, Mr. Wadu, would you like to respond to Representative Strong's questions as to where to put migrants?
There's been a population decrease in the United States since 2010, and COVID only made it worse. This country is going to need more people across this country. There are thousands of businesses looking for workers. We have a huge need of workforce, even in the state of New York. We launched a website asking, through the Department of Labor, asking businesses who wanted to hire folks to sign up on the website. 18,000 jobs were listed on that website within a matter of a few days. There's even more at this point that are being listed there. There was a number of things that that your colleague mentioned that were just not really founded in truth. There's a huge need if you speak to your partners in the Midwest, if you speak to your colleagues across the country and actually speak to the needs that they're seeing on the ground, they're going to tell you that there is a huge need for population.
Or even the suggestion that all immigrants somehow are thieves and robbers and unsavory bad people. Is that's a misnomer and a dangerously incorrect statement to make?
Yeah, that's incredibly incorrect. Immigrants make communities safer across the United States, not just in New York. And that's verified by data that you can even speak to, law enforcement in New York on.
And on that, let me follow up. I want to start by reiterating the fact that, is it not a fact that every migrant released into our communities, including New York City, is vetted by a CBP? Every single one completes biometrics, and it's run against our databases.
Yes. And as they arrived at Port Authority last year, when they were being bussed, in most cases at that time in the early days of the busing from Texas, under misleading
So these are not people that are just
information.
being brought in, let in, and they're not checked. There's
No, they were
back-
processed and are given a packet of information with their immigration, pretty much registering them through the immigration system at the border.
How would more federal investments in our legal pathways and the Shelter and Services Program better help local communities? Are you aware that all the House Republicans voted to slash the funding that's being sent to New York for this purpose?
Yes, and that's a horrible mistake. As you heard from your colleagues on the dais, everyone keeps talking about cuts and cuts and cuts. But the folks on this dais can actually stop those cuts by investing more resources into the solutions that have been proven to work. The FEMA program with the ESFP or the SSP program, those programs are working. We need more resources in them so that we don't have to have these conversations about cuts or not cuts.
Hence my insistence in every conversation we have about exercising civility, exercising facts, and not political brinksmanship to score points. Listen, this is a real issue. This is a real issue, and I applaud my members for trying to find solutions, but I will likewise caution us to avoid the just brinksmanship of gaining points. Listen, I don't think you can blame any one particular person for any of the issues that are here. These issues have been around a long time. I think we all acknowledge that. But I know one thing for a fact. As long as we continue to have this tug of war and political gamesmanship, it makes it more and more difficult for us to ever give the relief that I think these gentlemen, every one of you at the table, is asking for. I implore our members to get back on track to finding solutions and not pointing fingers. New York City, we've heard Republicans say that New York City is cutting parts of its city services budget due to the migrant crisis. However, they've conveniently left out is that Mayor Adams also attributes the cuts to the ending of federal pandemic aid. So it's my understanding that the cuts to the budget and freezing police hiring do not fall solely on the immigrants, but also cuts to pandemic aid. Can you put New York City's budget in context in that response, in that regard?
New York City's budget is over $110 billion. It has an enormous amount of money that comes in from the state and the federal government. When the administration came in back in 2022, they were seeing that 5 years out, there was going to be a deficit of $21 billion, of which, this is before there was an increase in asylum seekers coming to New York, over $5 billion was COVID relief efforts, and then $16 billion were contracts that needed to get secured labor contracts. So in the grand context of this, the deficit that the city of New York was facing had very little, and currently right now, it's a very small fraction of the deficit. And just to clarify one thing, the president of my friend sitting right next to me mentioned the 5 firefighters per firehouse. And not every firehouse has had that for a long time. And I think it's important that we talk about this in this context because this has been many years issue. And the City Council of New York has been fighting to move that forward, but has not been successful in it because we need more funding. And if we were able to get more funding from the feds and the state to do that, that is important. But I don't want us to be misleading in the sense of saying, because of this financial crunch we were in.
Thank you. My time is far expired. As I yield back, Mr. Chairman, if you would just indulge me for a second to thank all of the committee members. Whether we agree philosophically or ideologically, it does not take away from the fact that we all love our country. We all love the strength that our country brings and builds. And I thank each of you for your commitment, particularly our police and law enforcement and firefighters who stand up every day, notwithstanding party, race, or ideological differences, to protect the people of our great country. So thank you for your service.
Thank you, Mr. Ranking Member. I now recognize from New York, Mr. Lilloda.
Border security used to not always be a partisan thing. You could go back a couple of decades ago and watch Democrat presidents on their State of the Union addresses speak about how we ought to secure our border, but somehow we've devolved into this partisan rhetoric on this issue. We look at our shoes. Some members in the House look at their shoes sometimes about why the border isn't secure. I'm comfortable with where my party sits on this. It is fortunate that Democrats and Republicans do agree at least on one thing in this hearing, that New York City absolutely does have a migrant crisis. But the way the two parties approach it today is vastly different. I'm a Navy man, so I can't resist but to use a couple of nautical analogies as I approach a problem. And I think that New York City's migrant crisis is like a ship taking on water. The migrant crisis, with 10,000 migrants coming to New York City every month and without the resources to shelter them, is like a ship taking on water. And to continue that analogy, and I don't mean to editorialize, and if the ranking member or anybody else disagrees, I'm happy to debate that, but the Democrat solution seems to be to build a bigger boat. That is to say that the Democrats want to throw more and more money and resources at the migrant crisis, to take over parkland, to build tent cities, and to have taxpayers rent hotels at taxpayer costs. And to pay for it, New York City officials are cutting from some of their own services, like fire department services, like police department services, and shifts and academy classes and whatnot. And the city officials who have adopted the sanctuary policies that have caused this crisis, they won't repeal them. Rather, they want our federal tax dollars to pay for their policy choices. And I'd like to analyze my party's solution to this, and further taking on that ship taking on water analogy. Our solution is to plug the hole through better policy choices and not to just throw more and more money at the situation. My colleagues and I who sit on this side of the aisle assert that this is a crisis of policy choice, that President Biden choosing to repeal the Remain in Mexico policy invites migrants to our country who will feign asylum, that their asylum claims won't ultimately approved. The number is somewhere between 60 and 80%, depending on which source you look at. The overwhelming majority of asylum claims ultimately will not be approved, and they'll be adjudicated 2 years later. That's a problem, and that's a policy choice. We assert that reinstating the Remain in Mexico policy would actually decrease the number of folks coming into our country who will feign that asylum, who will take advantage of those loopholes. And we also assert that repealing New York State's and New York City's sanctuary city policies, which prevent local law enforcement from enforcing our immigration laws, is a good thing and would help our crisis, because those sanctuary policies act as a magnet, drawing people across that border into cities who will not enforce federal immigration law. Mr. Iwata, thanks for being here today, sir. In your opening statement, you said that legislative paralysis is the main reason for our nation's border crisis and New York City's migrant crisis. Did I hear you correctly, sir?
I said it was the main reason for congressional inaction, yes.
Okay, so legislative paralysis, is that the reason, or a significant reason, in your opinion, sir, for this migrant crisis?
I think that it is part and parcel to the way in which the true source of problems that we're facing becomes congressional paralysis.
I appreciate the perspective. I obviously disagree. House Republican solution, or at least one solution to the migrant crisis and the border crisis, is H.R. 2. Are you familiar with H.R. 2, sir?
Yes.
Okay, in general, it would do a bunch of different things. It would help secure our border and disincentivize illegal immigration. You're a bit familiar with it?
Slightly, yes.
With respect to your term, legislative paralysis, do you know when H.R. 2 passed, sir?
I don't recall, but
May 12th. About 180 days ago, House Republicans took action with respect to policy on our border about 180 days ago, telling the world this is where we stand on immigration specifically, and the hallmark of it is reinstating Remain in Mexico. So using your term, legislative paralysis, has the United States Senate undertaken either H.R. 2 or anything else policy-wise related to border security?
Immigration reform is only going to be
yes
done
or no, sir?
by a bipartisan
yes or no, sir?
way. And H.R. 2...
Reclaiming my time. I'll answer it for you. No.
No, they
the
haven't.
Senate The Senate, controlled by Democrats, has not done anything policy-wise. So if you're offering that legislative paralysis is part of the problem, I'd agree with that aspect, but maybe you go across the hall and tell those folks, undertake H.R. 2, at least debate it. Maybe it doesn't have the votes there, maybe it does. Debate it and specifically address the Remain in Mexico policies that we believe will help secure our border. Mr. Chairman, I think we've made some progress here today. We obviously disagree on a lot, but having this conversation, bringing on our local officials is productive and informative to us so we can assert the right policy and budget choices. I yield, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Lalota. I now recognize from Oklahoma, Mr. Burkeen for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So if you are under the limitations of a mayor of New York City who said, prepare for 15% cuts. Eric Adams said, prepare for 15% cuts because of the cost of illegal immigrants in this city. The same mayor who made national news saying this is going to destroy New York City. So you know that what we've already seen, a 4% cut to police departments within New York. We know what you said, you've got fire departments right now that are seeing up to 10% cuts, where instead of 4 men trying to, I'm sorry?
20%.
Up to 20%, I'm sorry. 20%. So you've got some fire departments that were at 4 members trying to run a hose. Unlike rural Oklahoma, these are having to go in multiple stories. And the difference between 4 men bringing that system of connection of hoses to be able to put out a fire versus 5, you cite how big of a difference that is in being able to put out fires and just the preparedness and protection of life, protection of property. I'm assuming insurance rates also play into that. So I'm going to get your name wrong. Mr. Awade, did I do it correctly?
Close. Good.
Close. So you were citing the taxpayer input from New York.
Yeah.
You went through multiple billions of dollars that you said these amount of taxes are paid. You were in the neighborhood of 15 billion approximately. Is that fair?
Yeah.
15 billion.
For the 3 congressional districts that of the members from New York who sit on this committee, yes.
Okay. Do you realize that the cost we're seeing as high as anywhere from $450 billion a year? And when you're saying, well, New York provides this amount of taxpayer monies, you do take into consideration that's to fund everything, correct, on the federal level. It's not just to fund illegal immigration.
I'm sorry, what's your question?
So the tax earnings that are paid in federal level, they support all expenditures on the federal level. They're dispersed among all general accounts.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but you're using $15 billion and trying to justify up to $450 billion is what illegal immigration is costing this country. It's a minimal amount. The point I'm trying to make is they're not paying for themselves.
No, they're paying more than them for themselves in
not the statistics I've seen. Not even close to a third of the tax dollars that are accrued. Not even a third. So I think you need to check your statistics on that.
We can agree to disagree on that.
Okay. So, but my point is, at what place will you concur that this is insanity? From 1892 to 1954, we had 12 million illegal immigrants that came into this country legally. Give us your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, those longing to breathe free, legally. 60-year time span, 12 million. Under this administration, we have already seen almost that number within 2.5 years, illegally come into this country. Are we a nation of laws?
Yes.
Is anybody above the law?
No.
Are illegal immigrants above the law?
No one's saying that they are above the law. What we are saying is that we have to have better systems. You're referencing time periods from industrialization up to the post-1965 immigration era, which is, in some of your numbers, inaccurate, but
no, anybody can look this up. 12 million from 1892 to 1954.
Where in the early 1900s, all you had to do is just show up. and go through Ellis Island and no papers, no visa. After World War II, there were embassies that were created, and then there was a slight processing process outside of the US, but people can still show up to Ellis Island. So this is, it was not that was how the system was, and the system continues to allow for folks.
Let me ask you, did we fear nuclear detonation from 1892 up till 1940? No. We live in a different environment now where somebody can come into the United States and with a small amount of armament can do a massive amount of destruction. We live in a different world today. And so heightened levels of scrutiny are so important. I'll end with this. Gang members from Chile were caught in New York City. Because of lawlessness, because we're not deporting, we're down 85% under the Obama administration, this administration. Because of lawlessness, we're not deporting. These gang members picked up on charges were not deported. They're somewhere in the country right now, and we don't know where. Lawlessness compounds lawlessness like dominoes. I yield, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Burkeen. I now recognize from New York, Mr. Lawler.
My wife is an immigrant. I've been through this process. It is a fundamentally broken system. Would you agree that our current immigration system is not working?
Our current immigration system has been broken for decades and needs updating, yes.
Okay. I was born in 1986. The last major immigration reform was 1986. It's been tried. Both sides have tried to find compromise. When you say we need more immigrants, I agree. We do need more immigrants in our country. Immigrants enrich our economy, they enrich our culture, our communities. Our nation is built on immigration. And the reality of our population is that if we stopped all immigration, our population would decline over the next 60 years. So immigration is critically important, but legal immigration. And that is the challenge here. Since Joe Biden took office, between those who have crossed the southern border, many of them illegally, and the gotaways, we're talking about nearly 10 million migrants. That is unsustainable if you don't have a process that works. The asylum system is totally broken. So the way that I have looked at this is threefold. You have to deal with the border crisis, you have to deal with the undocumented, and you have to deal with the legal immigration system. It's three-pronged. So my question to you is, do you believe that the border needs to be secured and we need to stop allowing this massive influx, roughly 10,000 a week, to cross the southern border, many of them illegally? Do you think that we should stop that influx and secure the border?
The U.S. border has never had the level of funding that it has for a militarized border. It receives the most money from the interior.
Reclaiming my time. Do you think we should have a border? I guess let's start there. Do you think we should have a border?
We have borders.
Okay. So if we have a border,
districts.
If we have a border, do you think we should secure the border and actually have a process by which people cross the border?
When there are pathways for entry for people to make it through, people will take those entries. Similarly, when you're looking at, I think you're trying to make reference.
My point is there should be a legal process and pathway for people to come,
and people
not just
asylum
flood the border.
Is a legal process.
But you would agree that right now there's chaos at the border, correct?
We need more resources at the southern border to allow for more processing of individuals to get into.
Well, you just said we've had the most resources we've ever had at the border, and now you're saying we need more.
Militarizing our southern border, yes.
We need more border patrol. We need more court personnel to hear these asylum cases expeditiously, correct?
Yes.
You would agree with that?
USCIS staff.
Right. We need more personnel to handle the influx that is coming. But right now, this is absolutely out of control. Now, I supported H.R. 2, the Secure the Border Act. Chuck Schumer, the Senate Majority Leader from New York, representative of New York, has done zero und Gats on the border. Nothing on immigration. It's been an abject failure. The Dignity Act, I was an original co-sponsor of. It would deal with the border, it would deal with the undocumented, and it would reform our legal immigration system. We need a merit-based system because we do have shortages of employment among doctors, nurses, home health aides, ag workers, hospitality workers. We need immigrants, but there has to be a process. This is not working. And while I appreciate the fact that you are advocating for immigrants in this country and in New York, I can't imagine that you think this process is working well for them. I can't imagine that you think having over 100,000 migrants living in hotels, shelters in New York City is a good thing, that not having work authorization is a good thing. So if the system's not working, why would we continue to allow this system to go uninterrupted? Why would we continue to allow our southern border to have no controls? Why would we continue to allow fentanyl to pour into our communities? Last year, fentanyl killed 70,000 Americans, most of it coming from Mexico. That's not good. So if we know it's not good, if we know the system's not working, if we know New York City is buckling under the pressure, if we know Eric Adams is saying it's going to cost us $12 billion over the next 3 years, if we know Kathy Hochul is saying we can't sustain this, if we know New York City is now saying we need to cut services, we need to cut the NYPD, we need to cut the FDNY, why in God's name are we continuing like this? You should be chanting from the rooftops of New York City, demanding changes. And it starts with securing our border. I don't know why, if you want to fix the immigration system in this country, you wouldn't advocate for stopping this system that is so fundamentally broken.
It's not about advocating for stopping the system. It's about fixing the systems that we have been living in since you were born and have not been changed significantly. The problem here is that there isn't any bipartisan solutions being put forward.
I put one forward. The Dignity Act is a bipartisan bill introduced by Republicans and Democrats, the first bipartisan immigration bill in over a decade. Have you endorsed it?
No. And
why?
It is moving away from what has been already agreed to in past reform conversations, and instead creating a second class.
So the reality is you don't want immigration reform. You want open borders.
We want immigration
you want open borders,
fair.
and you just want it
No,
to
that
keep
is
on
absolutely
trucking.
not
And that's
the
the
case.
problem.
We
here.
want immigration
Mr.
reform.
Lawler, thank you. Your time has expired. I want to thank everyone for being here today on this hearing, protecting our preparedness and assessing the impact of the border crisis on emergency management. I want to thank our witnesses. Thank you all for being here, both this morning and now this afternoon. We appreciate the work that you all do. Perhaps we don't agree on everything, but to those of you out there on the front lines protecting and serving, I thank you very much, and I hope that you remain safe. The members of the subcommittee may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we would ask the witness to respond to those in writing. Pursuant to Committee Rule 7D, the hearing record will be held open for 10 days. I want to thank Ranking Member Carter for being here. Without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned.
I was going to ask you that this morning, if that's okay with you. Yeah. And then